Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Before I continue, I would like to ask you to write in the chat if you can hear me. Just a quick note to make sure. All right, wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us today. It is a pleasure to have you all here. This is our second webinar in this mini webinar series on conducting forensic interviews with children. The first one was done we had in February, and the recording is available on our webinar page. Today we are very happy to have Cortana Pullen-Flander with us to talk on adapting forensic interviews to the needs of the child, and we will have the third session on March 14th. More information is also available on our website, also linked to conducting forensic interviews. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the ChildHub, and just to give you a few technical information before I give floor to Shona, who is the Promise Project Manager. Basically, for those of you who are new to our webinars, and I saw that we have a few new people, ChildHub webinars are recorded, and the recordings together with the presentation of the presenter will be available on our webinar page after this webinar ends. So you can share it with the colleagues who couldn't join us today, or you can also revisit it later if you want to check something again. To make sure, I hope so far everybody can hear me well. To make sure that you can follow the webinar, please just make sure that the green icon on your top black bar is that it remains green throughout the webinar. It's the speaker's icon, and if it's green, then you should be able to hear us. If you have any technical problems throughout the webinar, please do not hesitate to write to me and my colleague Vesna in the chat. If you just write in the chat to host, we will get your message and we will do our best to help you. Also, a kind remark for those of you who said that you had problems to sign in today for a webinar. Please just let us know in the chat what was the problem, and we will work with the IT support to fix it for the future. Unfortunately, participants cannot use microphone on this presentation, but we encourage you to use the chat and to write us in the chat, and we are really looking forward to having your comments, feedback, and anything else you would like to share with us. I will give floor to Shona in just a moment, but before, I would like to share a very interesting opportunity that we have with you. You can just see the link in the chat. And basically, this is a product of our cooperation with one of the Swedish companies, and we are trying to see how technology can be used to help people conducting interviews with children practice those interviews and develop their interviewing skills, try different techniques, and see what the result would be, but of course without the negative consequences for a child. This is not possible to be done in reality because, we are experimenting on how technology can be used, and we have the opportunity. We are happy to invite you to register for a demo test where you can interview a virtual child, and you can see how basically you can use technology to practice your interviewing skills and be ready for this task when it emerges in the real life. Since you are all today because you're interested in this topic, I thought it's good to share this news with you. Please read it. If you click on the link, you can access it, and let me know if you have problems. But read it, and you will see that you can register there. We would be very happy to have you on this training. Just please note that the number of places is limited, so we advise you to be as fast as possible. Now I think this is all from my side. I am very happy to give floor to Shona von Blixen. She is the Promise Project Manager, and she will tell you a bit of the background for the Promise Project, and then give floor to our speaker. Shona, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Katerina, and good afternoon, everyone. Like Katerina introduced, I am Shona von Blixen, and I'm from the Council of the Baltic Sea States. We are an intergovernmental organization and also the lead partner of a project called Promise. And I think there's some names that I haven't seen here before. And some people have even said that this is their first webinar, so welcome. So I give a basic introduction to Promise and what a Barnahus is. So the Barnahus is sometimes known as a children's house, and it is not a place where children go to stay. It is rather a child-friendly office where law enforcement, criminal justice, child protection services, medical and mental health workers cooperate, all under one roof, a child-friendly location, to listen to the child's story and provide rapid access to justice and care for child victims and witnesses of violence. In Promise, we are now in the second phase of this project. The first phase launched a European-level dialogue, which explored the criteria for Barnahus and similar models in depth and developed standard-setting publications. And in that process, only select professionals from around Europe were invited. Our speaker today, Gordana, was one of them. Now, in this second phase, countries are developing their own national dialogue, agreements, capacity, and more. And with this webinar series, it's an open invitation for you to join the discussions and take part in our learnings. And these learnings include key principles, standards, challenges to consider when opening and operating a multidisciplinary and interagency collaboration for child victims and witnesses of violence. A key common criteria for Barnahus is that it ensures the evidentiary validity of the child's statement in line with the principles of due process and is preventing the child from having to repeat his or her statement during court proceedings. And I want to highlight two standards from our HERO document, the Barnahus Quality Standards, which are relevant for this call today. The first is Barnahus Quality Standard number 6, the forensic interview. There's a lot more that you can read about this in our publications, but I will highlight in particular that forensic interviews, according to our standards, are carried out by specialized staff at the Barnahus or similar setups. And these staff members are specialized in providing a child-friendly environment, adapting to the needs and abilities of the child, in eliciting the child's free narrative in as much detail as possible, and complying with the rules of evidence and the right of defense. And quality standard number 3, inclusive target group, this highlights another important role of the Barnahus, the importance of providing equitable access to justice and care for all children, regardless of age, ability, origin, etc. And on this next slide, as a short person myself, I resonate very strongly with this, the importance of and impact of lifting those up, even just slightly, to be able to take part in a real way. You can read much more about the Barnahus Quality Standards and a lot more about our learnings at the link on your screen at the publications page. The standards come in many varieties. We have the short version, the long version, many translations, and ebook. And it is time to welcome our speaker for the day, Ms. Gordana Bouillon-Flander, as a director and initiator of the Child and Youth Protection Center of Zagreb, and one of our most influential experts in the Promise Network. You are in great demand, traveling all over Europe these days. I know your schedule, and we are so glad to have about 30 minutes of your time today. So we won't hold this up any longer. Please take it away.
Okay, so let's start with gathering factual information regarding allegations of abuse and/or exposure to violence conducted by neutral professionals based on research or practice-informed techniques as a part of larger investigative process. Speaking of forensic interview, we have to start with the needs of children in legal proceedings. This refers to child needs to to feel safe, which is opposite to being safe. It is also important that the child has information about procedure that will follow, so he or she does not lose sense of control in the process. Children also need support for expressing their feelings and opinions, as well as addressing unpleasant emotions that might occur during the process. Therefore, each child, you don't hear.
Can we start?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. Let's move to the beginning of presentation. So I will start with my presentation again. So I'm going to talk about the adapting the forensic interview to the child, standard 6 and standard 3. So when we are talking about forensic interview, let me firstly define what forensic interview of children is. It is developmentally sensitive and legally sound methods of gathering factual information regarding allegations of abuse and or exposure to violence. It is conducted by neutral professionals on the basis of research and practice-informed techniques in the context as a part of a larger investigative process. So, speaking of forensic interview, we have to start with the needs of children in legal proceedings. This refers to child need to feel safe, which is opposite to being safe. It is also important that child has information about the procedure that will follow, so he or she does not lose sense of control on the process. Children also need support for expressing their feelings and opinions, as well as addressing unpleasant emotions that might occur during the process. Therefore, each child has rights to be approached individually, according to his or her developmental level, emotional difficulties, cultural or language differences, personality traits, etc. It is very, very important to address child's feeling of guilt and send clear message that it is not their fault. Okay? So, child-friendly approach means kind, friendly, and reflective approach, which enhances memory, decreases suggestibility, and is found as most helpful to children and families. So I'm going to show some of the most used evidence-based interview protocols, but I'm not going to go into details. But what is important, I'm going to tell what they have all in common. All of them are evidence-based practices and are resulting from previous research. All of them are focused on child-friendly approach, minimizing re-traumatization, and are respecting children's right to participate and to be heard. All of them are some essential parts. First of all, it's important to create relationship with the child. After that is following developmental assessments. And only after that we gather information, fact-finding and trauma assessments. After that we have to assess child's future needs, and we are finishing with closing. So when we are talking about adapting each phase to the child, it's very important to plan what we are going to do in creating relationship with the child. So this is the first step, which is very, very important, that child feels safe with us. After that, we have to do developmental assessment, which is especially crucial when interviewing children with disabilities and or special needs. And we have to adapt questions to the child in the phase of gathering information, fact-finding and trauma assessment. When we are preparing for the interview, we have to find out the answers on these questions. So to gather information, firstly to gather information about age and developmental level, and then developmental or physical disabilities. We have to see what culture or ethnic background. We have to provide, in some cases, a qualified translator, and we have to keep an open mind and consider alternative explanations for the statements or behavior leading to suspicion of abuse. And we have to find out, in preparing for the interview, answers to these questions. How does child manage anxiety? What are the interest points of that child? What's the child's routine? And to find out what's the best time for the interview. When we are talking about timing and duration, it's well known that it's preferable to interview a child as soon as possible after the alleged events, and interview is better if it is shorter, especially for younger children, and we have really to take care of signals indicating fatigue, loss of concentration, physical needs, etc. Interview setting has to be private, informal, free from distractions, child-friendly, neutral, and it is preferable also that interviewer is the only person present with the child whenever it is possible. This is on this slide you can see how interview room is looking in our center. So it's very important that center's interviewer and the child is in one room. Judge, defendant, defense lawyer, social worker, prosecutor, police, they are in another room, and judge and involved parties ask the child through the mental health expert. Our experts adapt the questions according to the disabilities or abilities of the child. The whole procedure is audio and video recorded and can be used as an evidence in the court procedure, as Shauna was speaking before. So child-friendly approach is especially important in interviewing children with disabilities and refers to being respectful of their rights and needs, with specifically educated professional interviewing the child, adjusting vocabulary and pace to child's age, needs and emotional state, using evidence-based protocols, which is very, very important, open-ended questions, being as simple and concrete as possible when we are talking about child with, especially with intellectual disabilities, at the same time avoiding suggestive and abstract questions as well as double negatives. There are four primary categories of disability. These are communication, intellectual disabilities, social or emotional or physical disabilities, while children can have difficulties in multiple categories. Having in mind that children with disabilities and or special needs are more vulnerable for child abuse, it is not surprising that higher level of disability is related to increased risk of sexual abuse and repeated victimization. With children with intellectual disabilities having the highest rate of victimization due to their limited understanding, social and communication skills, frequent isolation, etc. When we are talking about developmental assessment, as I said before, it is a process lasting throughout the whole interview, the purpose of which is adjusting the vocabulary and the interview during the interview and determining child's baseline necessary to distinguish between child's developmental characteristics and lack of credibility. Areas of assessment includes include speech and language, measurement, time, basic concepts, first, last, always, beside, before, inside, number concepts, knowledge of colors, kinship, representation ability, real and pretend, vocabulary, understanding of truth and lie. After introducing ourselves at the beginning of the interview, we explain the child the process, address their questions, and with a relaxed pace show interest in the child, which is very, very important, that we are showing the interest in the child and his life and his interest, not only to the thing that happened to him, bad things that are happening to him or her. So we are allowing the child to become more comfortable with the process, which is also the reason why we start with positive details of child's life. So when setting the ground rules, it is very important to tell and to keep in mind that children are accustomed to speaking to adults who already know the answers. So it's important to tell the child, you know more than me about what happened. And if I say things that are wrong, you should tell me. Okay. If I repeat the question, it does not mean that first answer was wrong. It's also important that to set ground rules as telling the truth and permission for the child not to know the answer, not understanding the question, not remembering, not wanting to answer at least at that very moment, or to take a break. So we really can allow the child, so if I ask you something that you don't understand, tell me please. If I understand something wrong, please tell me that it was wrong. It is very important that you only tell me the truth, things that really happened to you today. Next slide. Next slide, if techniques will go okay, we are going to see a short video of a boy with intellectual disabilities. He is actually 17, but functioning mentally at a level of 7. So he was sexually abused, and you can see the process of setting ground rules at the beginning of the interview. Please not record or screenshot this video, because we have permission only to show it in trainings, not to show it so publicly.
Thank you very much. So just a moment, I will set up the video and I will pause the recording. So just a minute.
Anything in narrative. So we can say, I see you had your birthday recently. Tell me everything you remember about that day. Start at the beginning and tell me everything about it. Or tell me everything you did from the time you got up this morning until you came here. So we implement actually interview instructions. We establish baseline of linguistic functioning and memory abilities, and we learn which questioning formats elicit the most narrative responses. So this part in talking with the child on neutral events is very, very important because of the things I said before. Then we are transitioning to allegation topic. So after having established narrative practice and addressed the baseline for each individual child, we move to allegation topic as open-ended and non-suggestive as possible, as the child should be given the opportunity to provide a spontaneous report. So these questions are, what are you here to talk to me about? What do you think that your mom or dad or someone who is with the child are bringing you here to talk about. If open-ended questions, if with open-ended questions, we do not switch to allegation topic, we can use more focused, but still open questions, such as, sometimes I talk to children when something has happened to them. Has something happened to you? Is someone worried about you? So now we are going to talk about few forensic considerations while interviewing children with disabilities and or special needs. Children with difficulties from autism spectrum disorder have, for example, sensitivity to sensory stimuli and often have overdeveloped fight-flight-freeze responses that we need to be respectful of during interview, moving barriers and distractions, which is very, very important to do with children from autism spectrum disorder. We have to be careful about our movements and questions we use. We have to be careful about sounds, lighting, colors, and keeping it concrete and keeping questions concrete and short, allowing more time, as those children often need longer time for processing and words formulation. So when we are talking about developmental disability, there are some myths we have to mention. Some myths are that these children are more suggestible, that they cannot distinguish truth from lie, that they cannot remember past events with accuracy and cannot give a credible testimony. So addressing these myths with facts is our responsibility. When we are forensic interviewers, we have to know that children with developmental disabilities provide credible testimonies if approached in a child-friendly and evidence-based manner. Therefore, when asking open and free recall questions, clarifying ground rules, and adapting the vocabulary and pace to their developmental level, they are able to provide as much accurate information as mental age peers. So what are general suggestions for those children? First of all, we have to give them extra time in rapport building phase. We have to become familiar with child's abilities and language. We have to assess development and ability to respond to abstract questions on neutral topics. So if they cannot function in this abstract part, we are not putting those questions. Open-ended invitations are recommended as much as possible. One idea per question, and check for tendency to say yes to most questions or no to most questions. And we really have to clarify with them, I don't understand that part, please say again. Some of those children need more breaks than other children, so if we can't gather information in one interview, we have to consider extended forensic interviews, so it means several short interviews. The less visible the child's disabilities are, the higher expectations we might have, and more frustration the forensic interview can elicit both in child and interviewer. Therefore, we should not skip the process of pre-interview preparation and developmental assessment. It is even more important to do with children with disabilities. So child is much more than the diagnosis her or she has. I like to think of it as the child is challenged by disability, not defined by it. The same goes for the forensic interview, as it can be challenged by the disability of a child and does not have to be defined by it. We have to keep this in our minds. When we are investigating incidents, meaning if there were more incidents or one incident, it's very important to distinguish between recall and recognition questions, as recall questions elicit more information and are more reliable and less influenced by interviewer. So recall means narrative imitation, focused narrative requests, detailed questions, who, what, when, where, how. Recognition means multiple choice questions, yes, no questions, questions that introduce information or an idea. There are some techniques that encourage narrative responses. They include separation of incidents. So we have to avoid frequency questions. It is enough to ask, did it happen one time or more than one time? If more than once, we have to begin with the last time. If we ask a child, let's say 6 years old, and ask him how many times did it happen to you, he will say hundreds of times or 25. So it is not recommended to ask how many times did it happen. Open-ended invitations are recommended. Tell me everything that happened, even the little parts you don't think are important. And request to elaborate. You mentioned that and that, or that person, or that object, or that activity. Tell me more about it. During the whole interview, we ask the child, tell me more about it, describe it. I want to know more about it. When you're talking about detailed clarification techniques, they should be used with extreme caution when interviewing children with disabilities and or special needs, as they can overly be suggestive and encourage play. We can ask children to draw child's family, place of abuse, offender, or himself, but it is very important that the child describes him by himself what's happening on this drawing. We are not allowed to describe what's happening. That's what child has to do. Anatomical drawings you can see here can be also used, but the child is the one who is talking what he is drawing and what's happening. When we are talking about anatomical dolls with the primary and secondary sex characteristics, we have to be very, very, very careful. There are some countries, something happened. There are some countries that they're not allowed to use not allowing to use anatomical dolls because of this I said previous. Because if we are using anatomical dolls, they should be used only after verbally disclosed demands. Then we switch to information about disclosure. After gathering relevant information, some of examples of those questions can be found here. Tell me what happened after the last incident. Does anyone else know what happened? Tell me what you were talking about. And then we go to closure, where we summarize information and the closure. It is important to thank the child, but not for what has been said, but for participating. If we are thanking him for the content of the conversation, we can contaminate his statement at the court if the child is going to the court later on. so we can contaminate his statement later on. So we can say, you told me a lot of things today, and I want to thank you for talking to me. Is there anything else you would like to tell me? After that, we switch to a neutral topic at the end of the interview. For example, what will you do today after you leave? In summary, I cannot highlight enough how important it is to have specially trained professionals with specific trainings in interviewing children and interviewing children with disabilities and or special needs, following evidence-based practices and protocols, using developmentally appropriate, open-ended and non-suggestive questions, as well as having in mind that forensic interview is often an initial stage step of long-term support. Thank you. I can't hear you well, but if I understand you, the question was, is parent in the room? Actually, I would like more meetings with the child. Then the child make a connection with me, and the child is feeling safe with me. And it's better not. It is better that the child and the interviewer are alone in the room, because the child is trying to see from, let's say, mother's face or aunt's face, is he or she allowed to tell this, or he's or she is taking.
Close a bit earlier, maybe, well, actually on time, but we lost some time. If you have any questions that are related to this webinar and you don't have time to ask it to Gordana now, you can write us on info@childhub.org. I will put